Hi, this is Monica Sheard, and this is my lesson plan. My lesson plan is on the expressive vocabulary, and the targeted age group is 2nd grade through 4th grade, but the activity can actually be adapted to different grade levels just depending on their needs. So the objective has to do with prepositions, and so the student or the client needs to be able to use the correct preposition in giving me directions, and I'll get into that with the activity. So before we can start the activity, the student needs to have the background knowledge of what the different prepositions are. And so this is a very minor version of what I would be doing, but lots of visuals to teach what those prepositional phrases are. In the case of this activity or game, they're going to be focused on over or above, under or below, beside, to the left, and to the right. But again, we can adjust it and we can either make it more difficult or we can make it a little bit simpler depending on their needs. The other thing that they will need to have background knowledge on is the different colors and the different shapes, because they would be using said shapes and colors. So if they don't have that background knowledge, then they would need a mini lesson on that as well to teach that skill. But in teaching the prepositions, not only would we be using visuals like this, but playing games such as Simon Says. Kids typically like to play those games, and they also like to take leadership in those games, which I think just goes back to that expressive language skill that we're trying to target. So once we've taught the skill of those prepositional phrases, then we would get into the game, and it's a barrier game, and kids really like barrier games. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, it's similar to the game of Battleship, but instead of sinking battleships, you make a picture and or you build something, whether it's with blocks or with Play-Doh, or you put a picture together like with pattern blocks, and then you put up a privacy folder or a barrier, and your partner, you have to direct them to recreate what you just made, but they have to do it without peeking at yours. And so you have to make sure that you're giving very specific directions. And in this case, we're going to be using those prepositional phrases. So they would get a board like this, similar to tic-tac-toe, and there would already be a picture there in the middle, because in the middle is not one of those prepositional phrases, and we don't want to get into too much difficulty. But if we did need to make it a little bit harder, we could take the happy face off and make the student fill the whole board up. But so they pick the shape and the colors, and they put it in the boxes depending on just which ones they want. And once they filled up their board, then the student would then tell me, because I would have a board just like this as well, but again, there would be a privacy folder or something that's blocking it, and they would tell me what shape and what color. So they would say something like the yellow circle or the green star. And so once they would tell me that, then they would have to say, okay, put it next to the happy face, or put it under the happy face. And so they would go through all those same shapes that is on their board, and I would basically just be following their directions and putting those shapes exactly where they're telling me. Once they were done, then we would take off the privacy folder and we would check to see how accurate I was. And since it's them telling me the directions, if it wasn't accurate, it wouldn't necessarily be because I didn't know the prepositional phrases. It would be because the student didn't. So that would be like a good reinforcer, a good way to monitor and adjust to see, okay, which prepositional phrases did they not get? Do we need to reteach one of them? Do we need to reteach all of them? But overall, it's just a fun game to just kind of reinforce those prepositional phrases. If they were struggling a little bit and we needed to adjust it, then we could make it so that it was just 4 squares, or even just a row of 6. And if we needed it to be more difficult, we could add more boxes to it, or even taking off that image and having them fill the whole board up, and just using different prepositions for that. And the other thing too is instead of just using shapes and colors, we could use more difficult images, which again would tap into that expressive vocabulary. So, and I think that's it. Just going over my notes here to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh yeah, the other thing is with this game, we're playing the game under the assumption that that background knowledge of the colors and shapes are there. So I wouldn't be spending too much time on that, but obviously if they didn't have that, then there would be a mini lesson just to teach that. But again, since it's targeted for 2nd through 4th grade, we're going under the assumption that they know that, but then again, never completely assume because you never know what kind of background knowledge they have. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed that.